Welcome to the Lambton College International Graduate Services and Support Center, your dedicated resource for navigating life after graduation. We know the journey can be complex, from understanding immigration processes to making career decisions and expanding your professional network. That's why we're here, to simplify these challenges and support your transition into Canadian life. At the International Graduate Services and Support Center, our mission extends beyond your academic achievements. We are here to facilitate your successful integration into the Canadian workforce and society. From career counseling to workshops on Canadian workplace culture and immigration support, our services are tailored to meet the unique needs of international graduates. We're committed to empowering you with the tools and knowledge necessary for success. Embrace the opportunity to connect with fellow graduates and professionals through our networking events and stay informed with our comprehensive webinars covering a range of topics crucial for your postgraduate success. Remember, the path to achieving your aspirations is a journey we undertake together. Ready to take the next step? Visit our website and join our supportive community. Remember to follow us on Instagram and on LinkedIn for upcoming immigration webinars, networking events, and much more. Together, let's make your postgraduate journey a success.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Cristina Yiguren, Coordinator of the International Graduate Services and Support Center. I want to remind you that we are recording this webinar so that you can watch it later again on our YouTube channel, and you're also going to get the recording as always. I want to invite you as well to follow us on our social media accounts where you are going to get the latest information about the center. Next month, we're going to have a very exciting event, so stay tuned. We're going to have a networking event. So if you belong to any of our programs from technology, I'd recommend you to follow us and check our updates and check your email as well. If you would like to participate as a speaker, don't hesitate to contact us at internationalgrad@lambtoncollege.ca. Networking is a great opportunity to connecting with other people. You will get the opportunity to know more people in your field, and also you will enjoy some food and refreshments. So it's a great opportunity. Do not miss it out. I want to remind you that this center is dedicated to assisting you, our international graduates, as you seek employment and settle into Canadian life following graduation. International graduates from all four campuses have access to immigration, career advice, and networking events. Also, there are countless reasons why you can take pride in being a Lambton graduate. As you know, we've been ranked as one of Canada's top research colleges, and we're here to support you all the way, even after graduation. Today, we're going to have an amazing event with Sandra. Sandra is the CEO from Velosa Immigration. She is a registered immigration consultant, and she's going to help us understand better all the pathways we do have here in Ontario to get a permanent residence. So please don't forget to keep your questions in the Q&A, and we will try our best to go to all your questions if we can at the end of the webinar. We're also going to share some useful information about a center and Velosa Immigration in the chat. So again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Sandra, thank you so much. Now I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You could be anywhere else, but you're here. So I just want to thank you for your time. Our focus today is really to focus on the Ontario Immigration Nominee Program. Now, if you've been following the program, you'll know, and that's one of the questions that I'll probably get is, when are we going to see a draw? I wish I knew, but we don't. Nonetheless, we haven't seen one since the beginning of the year. I'm very hopeful that perhaps in April, the government will decide to surprise us, but nonetheless, I don't have a lot of the answers in terms of when we're going to see a draw. I think the focus of this webinar is looking at the eligibility criteria, really looking at those details. And then if you do want to go forward with creating an expression of interest, that you have the right information to do it yourself, or you can always hire a professional if you wish. So I'll get started. We have a presentation for you. Just make sure that I have this. For some reason, and just bear with me 2 seconds.
can find already in the chat the information about the center and Velosa Immigration.
All right, so that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. It's to obtain your permanent residence through the province of Ontario, right? And we chose Ontario for obvious reasons. You guys are graduates of Lambton or probably are still attending school. So the goal is to, obviously, for some, stay here, remain here, and look at ways that we could do it. So just a little bit about us. Velosa Immigration is a Canadian-based company, specializes in providing immigration legal advice to those that are interested in staying in Canada, coming to Canada, migrating to Canada, etc. We take all types of cases with the exception of refugee claims, but any other cases, we're more than glad to help you. So we've helped people from all over the world. We specialize in Latin America for the simple fact that my second language is Spanish. So I am Colombian, but I've been raised in Canada. So I speak both languages, but we've also worked with people in countries in Africa, as well as the Philippines, the Caribbean, etc. So more than glad to assist you guys if you wish. I used to work in the non-for-profit. So I used to actually work for Employment Ontario, helping youth at risk in Toronto. I worked with a lot of newcomers and employment services as well. Then I migrated to the private sector. I actually worked with a private career college in business development and was doing that for quite some time. And I decided that I wanted to follow my passion, and I was given the opportunity to start my business during COVID, and I've been doing this ever since. So we've helped over 500 families establish in Canada, and we continue to do so. We have a large following in our social media, specifically for Spanish speakers. However, we're trying to grow our following in English. So you'll more than likely see more followers in Spanish, but we also have an English page if you want to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, etc. My colleague isn't here with us, but Hernan also works with us. He's also a certified immigration consultant. He's from Argentina. He also has an Italian background, so he speaks English, Spanish, and Italian. So you can always book an appointment with him or myself if you wish. So let's get started. So every province has immigration programs, right? And provinces are really granted the opportunity to create these programs based on the need of the province. So you'll realize that a lot of provinces have different types of programs and different focus and different occupations that they want. And this is what we see in Ontario. Ontario really has a focus for certain occupations. So it's very important to understand the eligibility criteria, how you could qualify, and whether or not it's something that's feasible for you. Ontario, in this case, has approximately 9 to 10 programs. We're going to focus on 2 streams. So there's a job offer stream, and there's 3 programs under that. And it's exactly that. You're going to need a job offer in order to be eligible for the program. And then there's other 3 programs under the express entry stream, and we're going to discuss those as well. And that means that you're going to need an express entry profile so you could create an expression of interest. So under the job offer stream, we have 3 programs. We have the foreign worker stream, the international student stream, and the in-demand skill. Now, all of these programs share certain eligibility criteria. So we're going to talk about the general criteria, and then we'll get into details about each program. So as I mentioned, because it's a job offer stream, you're going to need a full-time and permanent position. Now, full-time is 30 hours a week. So as long as it's 30 hours, you're perfectly fine. And if it's permanent, it means that it can't have an end date. So you want to make sure that you have a full-time and permanent position. Now, that job offer needs to be in a tier 0, 1, 2, or 3 when we're discussing the foreign skilled worker program and the international student stream. For the in-demand occupation, this doesn't apply. We're going to be looking at unskilled positions in specific tiers, and I can later show you guys the list. But for the in-demand skills, you're looking at tiers 4 and 5, and depending on where the job offer is, whether it's inside or outside of the GTA, then there's going to be a specific list that applies. So that's what I mean by it needs to be an eligible occupation. Depending on the stream, you're going to have tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. or it needs to be an in-demand occupation. And we're going to look at the in-demand occupations. You're going to see anywhere from home support worker to manufacturing, etc. Then you're going to either have to be offered the median wage or the low wage, right? So when we're looking at the foreign worker stream and in-demand skill stream, the employer has to pay you the median wage. And now this is important because a lot of times people will be working in an occupation and they're getting paid a fair salary, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting paid the median for that knock, which then you have to have a conversation with the employer if there's an opportunity to receive a raise or a promotion in order for you to qualify. So let's go again. If we're talking about the foreign worker stream and the in-demand skill stream, we need to be paid the median wage. When you're applying through the international student stream, then the low wage level applies, okay? Now, it says that it needs to be a position that's urgently necessary to the employer, but if you have current working status, this is not applicable. And then for obvious reasons, because you're applying through the Ontario PNP, then it needs to be a position that's based in Ontario. Now, it's important to understand the difference between an application and expression of interest. So all of Ontario's programs are through an expression of interest. You're basically letting the province know, hey, I want to be considered, please choose me. And they manage a score system, and based on your score, you would be selected or not. So you would receive an ITA that would then allow you to apply for permanent residence. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have an application online. So a lot of people may misunderstand this and they assume that they're under maintained status. So let's not get confused. An expression of interest is simply just that. It's an expression of interest. You have to wait to get invited and you have to apply and have to be approved in order for you to move to the next step, which is applying for your PR. So if you have an expression of interest and you still haven't received an ITA, then it's important that you start considering other options if you're coming to the end of your work permit. With that being said, your work experience should have been gained while you had legal status in Canada and you were authorized to work. If applicable, you may need a valid license or other authorization. So there are professions or occupations that require you to have a license. For example, ECEs is a very popular one. You're going to need a license in order for you to work in this profession. There needs to be an intention to live in Ontario, and you can demonstrate this by studying here, rental agreements, license, etc. And then obviously legal status in Canada if it applies. Now, with these programs, the employer also needs to meet certain requirements. So it's not only the applicant, but also the employer needs to meet certain requirements. And I think this is important because a lot of times people will say, well, Sandra, I meet the general requirements, but my employer won't help me, or they're not going to support my application. Unfortunately, if we don't have employer support, then we can't go ahead and apply, right? So you can create an expression of interest, but you want to make sure that you have a conversation with the employer beforehand, because once you receive an ITA, you have 14 calendar days to submit your application. And sometimes 14 days isn't enough time to have this discussion with the employer. So you should know right off the bat if they're going to support you or not, because you are going to be required to submit an employer form with your application. So there are certain general requirements. We're going to focus on two, which I think are the most important ones, and it's in terms of the revenue requirements. So if the job offer is within the GTA, the employer has to have a revenue of $1 million a year. Or if it's outside of the GTA, then we're looking at $500,000, okay? As well as the number of employees in their payroll. So if it's inside the GTA, a minimum of 5 employees must be permanent residents or Canadian citizens. Outside of the GTA, we're looking at 3 that have to be permanent residents or Canadian citizens. Okay, this is important, and this is what the employer form is for. That employer form that needs to be completed by the employer is going to ask questions in regards to the CRA number, when they were registered, number of employees, etc. It is possible that you submit all of your application with the employer form, and maybe days down the line, the province will require more information. Important, they are not going to contact you. They're going to contact the employer directly requesting this information, whether it be their T2, financial statements, any questions regarding their payroll. They want to see maybe all of the T4s, etc., etc. So I think that gives employers maybe a peace of mind, because a lot of them might feel there's a liability issue, or perhaps they don't want to disclose certain information with the candidate for obvious reasons. So just to let them know that the province will contact them directly if more information is required. Okay, so we're going to jump into the the foreign worker stream. So this applies for people that perhaps are in Ontario under spousal open work permit, or even if you're a student and you no longer are eligible under the international student stream because 2 years have passed since the time you graduated, you can apply under the foreign worker stream. So the foreign worker stream is based on a point system. So you create an expression of interest and you're going to be given a number, and then you have to look at the previous draws to see if in fact you have a competitive score or not. So you're going to be scored on the occupational category. So looking at your tier and seeing whether or not you can get anywhere from 10 points to 3 points. Ontario prioritizes occupations in tech and health. That's something that has been a priority for the province for quite some time now. So these occupations are going to score higher. You're also going to be given points for your wage. So obviously, the higher you get paid, the more points you'll score. If you currently have a valid work permit, then you're going to get 10 points. If you are without a valid work permit, but you're under maintained status, so you apply to extend your work permit, then you would get 0 points. And you could create your expression of interest, and then if you get your work permit afterwards, then you can always just recreate it. Ontario unfortunately doesn't let you edit, so you would have to erase it and recreate it all over again. You're also going to get points based on the tenure, how long you've been working with the company, whether it's 6 months or more in that specific, with the specific employer, as well as how much money you made in your notice of assessment from the previous year. So anyone that makes 40K or higher, they're going to get 3 points or more. You're also going to get points based on your language proficiency, whether it be English or French. And then if you speak Canada's two official languages, you get additional points. There's also points for where the job offer is offered at. So you're going to get more points if it's in Northern Ontario than if you're working in Toronto. So Toronto gets 0 points. And they give you an explanation of what's considered Northern Ontario or not. You get points for working inside the GTA, so you get 3 points. So Mississauga, the Halton region, as long as it's not in Toronto. Now, we got some questions last time in terms of READY, which is a new regional economic immigration pilot that Ontario launched. There's no specific way to apply to this. So as long as you have a job offer in one of the 4 communities, and one of them is Sarnia Lambton, and then when there's specific draws, then you would be selected, but the province would take care of that. So there's no actual way that you could submit an application. They'll just look at the pool of candidates, and then they'll realize that you have a job offer in one of the 4 communities, and you would receive an invitation then. Again, this was launched this year. We haven't had any draws, so there's nothing really to compare it to. Now we're going to jump into the job offer for international student stream. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, with this one, you have to have a minimum of 2 years experience within the last 5 years. And it has to be relevant to the job offer that you're getting. So if you have a job offer as a data analyst within the 5 years, you have to show a minimum of 2 years work experience, whether it be inside Canada or outside Canada. Now for the job offer under the international student stream, again, we need to have a job offer. That job offer needs to be in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. It needs to be permanent and full-time. And for this particular stream, I don't need to show that I have work experience. I simply need that job offer. So this is way better, because if I don't have a job offer, or if I don't have experience in this NOC, it's not relevant to this. It's not going to require that I have experience. I just need that job offer in the eligible category, and I'm going to be granted points based on the tier that I have, as well as the occupational category. The wage that I'm going to be offered as well is going to grant me points. Whether or not I have a valid study or work permit as well. and the tenure that I have with the employer. I'm also going to be ranked on my education, and you can use your outside education if it's higher. So if you have a master's degree, for example, you would need an education credential assessment to be granted those additional points. The good thing about this is that you're also going to be granted points on your field of study. So like I mentioned before, Ontario really prioritizes certain industries, and one of the things that they give you extra points for is STEM. So if you studied anything in engineering, health, math, computer sciences, you're going to get the max points, which is 12, as opposed to someone that perhaps did arts and humanities. So we actually have a case of a Lambton student who went, I don't know if it was data analyst or something along those lines. He's currently working in the industry, has a very good salary. We've created an expression of interest. He has a very high score. But one of the reasons why he has a high score is because he's maximizing in all of the points due to what he studied and what he's currently working in. And just because you're eligible doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to receive an ITA. And I think that's important to note. Ontario has shown us that they specifically do targeted draws for certain NOCs. So the focus has been health, tech, ECEs. They only do general draws maybe twice or 3 times a year. So if you're working in an occupation that's not considered in demand, if you will, then you may not receive an ITA, or you'll have to wait longer than someone who's in an occupation that's been selected by Ontario over and over and over. If someone has 1 Canadian credential, they're going to get less points than someone that has 2. So this is just really a breakdown of all the points, and you can find this information on the website, but it's important for you guys to understand that it is based on a point system, and you're still going to be competing. It's kind of like express entry, if you will, but only the ranking is a bit different. And we also have to take into consideration what I just mentioned. It's not necessarily just a general draw. They also do draws specific to certain occupations. So that's something that we have to consider. Lastly, and it's important, you need to have created your profile, received an invitation, and submitted your application within a 2-year frame from your graduation. So there's a lot of people that don't do this, or they may be waiting to receive an invitation, but they still haven't sent their application, and 2 years have passed since the day that you graduated. Unfortunately, you're no longer eligible for this stream, okay? So it's important that if you're eligible, you create your expression of interest as soon as possible, so that when there is a draw, you get that ITA, and then you can submit your application and then be within the time frame that's eligible. The last program specifically for people that are working with what's considered in-demand skills, and this is for unskilled work, so tier 4 and 5 positions. I mentioned that I would look this up for you guys, so you guys could really look at exactly what I was referring to. So if we go here and we go into you'll see that there's a list of specific eligible occupations. So if someone that's working inside and outside the Greater Toronto area, your job offer could be in any one of these eligible NOCs. One of the very most popular ones are home support workers, caregivers, etc. Construction helpers, there's a lot of people working in this industry as well in Ontario. But if you're working outside of the GTA, then these are the ones that would be eligible, and there's a long list, so you can visit this at your own time. But it's important that you understand that not every NOC, very, very specific list. So with that being said, you need to have a full-time and permanent position in one of these NOCs that I just showed you, and you need to be paid the median wage, okay? So again, you have to check what the median wage is. You can check this at the job bank, just put your NOC, and then you go into the wages, and it'll show you. You click Ontario. If it's Toronto, you'll see, and you'll realize that that's the wage that the employer must offer. Now, the work has to be based in Ontario as well. And again, you need to have an expression of interest and wait to be invited. Last year, there was only 2 draws for this program the whole year, only 2, the beginning of the year last year, and it was a general draw. So pretty much anybody that was working any of the occupations can be selected. You must have at least 9 months of work experience in the same occupation. So it's important that you understand that. It also requires less work experience. The level of English that they require is also very low. We're talking about a CLB 4. So you'll see that programs for unskilled positions have lower requirements. They're also very specific as well. If applicable, you're going to need a valid license as well, and a minimum of a high school diploma. If you've obtained studies outside of Canada, then you will need to get your education credential assessment. Again, for all of these programs, you need an employer support. So you need the employer to be on board. You need the employer to meet the requirements that I mentioned in terms of revenue and people in their payroll, and they need to be open to signing that employer form in order for you to successfully submit your application. And then, like the other programs, there's scoring factors. So you're gonna get points based on the occupation or the knock, your salary, as well as your status, your tenure, your earnings of last year, etc. Now we're going to enter into the express entry stream. So the difference between these two is that with the job offer streams, you don't need an express entry profile. You simply need to meet the eligibility criteria, create an expression of interest, wait to be invited, and submit your application. Once you get your nomination, then you would apply for PR with the federal government. With the express entry streams, you need to have an express entry profile, but you also need to do an expression of interest. So it does differ. It's important that you understand that. We're going to talk about the express entry human capital priorities, as well as the federal skills stream and the francophone stream as well. So let's get started with the human capital priority stream. So as I mentioned, you need to have an express entry profile and be eligible for one of the two federal programs, whether it be federal skilled worker program or the Canadian Experience Class program. I'm not going to get into details about what each program requires because that would be another presentation on its own, but just make sure that you understand the eligibility criteria for each of these two programs so that you meet that in order for you to then create an expression of interest. For this particular program, your education must be at a Canadian bachelor's, master's, or PhD. And once again, anytime that you haven't obtained your education in Canada, you would have to get an education and credential assessment. You need to have a CLB 7 in French or English or higher at minimum. And you need to take a test in order for you to prove that you meet that requirement. Now, for the settlement funds, if you have a job offer, then you need to be mindful of exactly what the threshold is for the number of family members that you have. So let's say I'm just throwing numbers out there. If it's just yourself and you need to show per year a minimum of $30,000, if you have a job offer that offers you $30,000 a year, then that could be used. But if the job offer is only offering you $25K a year, then the remainder of the money needs to be shown with cash, and that money needs to be in a bank account, et cetera, et cetera. So there needs to be an intention to want to live in Ontario as well, have legal status if applicable if you're in Canada, and be mindful that if you are eligible through the federal skilled worker program, then in order for you to be eligible under the express entry stream, there needs to be 67 points at minimum. Now, for the Ontario Express Entry Skilled Trade Stream, it's only for people that have gained 1 year of cumulative full-time work experience in major groups. So we have to look at those, your occupation or your knock, and see if it qualifies for the specific skills or trades that Ontario prioritizes. And your work experience must have been obtained in the last 2 years from the date of submitting your application, or one or more of the occupations that you identified in your express entry while working legally in Canada. Now, it's important that if you're using, for example, experience in 2 occupations, that you demonstrate that that experience that you're counting, you have a valid certificate or license to work in that occupation. So some trades, or majority of them, will require people to have some sort of certification or license. So make sure that you're aware of the regulations for that occupation that you're utilizing, because at the time of the application, if the NOG is regulated, the province will request for you to submit that with your application. You need to have current residence in Ontario and legal status. The language level that they require is a COB 5 or higher, so it's fairly low. And again, the settlement funds, the example that I just gave you guys at the beginning, it's going to apply for all of this. You need to have the minimum amount that's required as a threshold for the number of family members in your family. And if you have a job offer and that annual salary meets that requirement, that's fine. If it doesn't, then you could partially use it, and then the remainder would have to be cash. And when I say cash, I mean money that you can demonstrate in your bank accounts. The last one is in Ontario's Express Entry French speaking. And this is for people that have not only speak French, but also speak an intermediate level of English. And for this specific program, or for the human capital stream, you don't necessarily need to have a job offer or work experience in Ontario or in Canada at that matter. It's just a matter of actually meeting the eligibility criteria of the program itself. So you could be a student potentially and have an Express Entry profile and do an expression of interest and be nominated. So if you need to have work, you need to be eligible for one of the two programs again. So Federal Skilled Worker Program or the Canadian Experience class. Your education again has to be equivalent to a bachelor's, PhD, or master's. Now you need a level 6 in English and a CLB 7 in French. Okay. Settlement funds, once again, same thing that I just mentioned, it applies. There needs to be an intention to live in Ontario, legal status, and if you're under the federal skilled worker, then you need to have a minimum of 67 points. Now, something that's very important, these are the general eligibility criteria. When you look at the selections that Ontario's done in the past, for example, under the human capital stream, you'll realize that there's two things that are very important, and you have to really keep an eye on the draws to understand whether or not it's something that's feasible for you. One of the things is that they'll select people with certain CRS scores. So some people are like, well, there was just a draw. Why did I get selected? If your CRS score is 450, just an example, but the province did a draw for CRS scores between 467 and 480, then you should have been within that range. So because this example, this person was under, they're not going to get invited. Not only that, but then sometimes they'll do very specific draws. So they'll do draws under the human capital stream only for people in tech. And then you'll look at the NOCs and it's a very specific list, or they'll do only for people in health occupations. So not really often do they do general draws. So that's very important to really look at the focus of Ontario and see how feasible or the likelihood of you getting selected based on probability, based on all of the draws that they're doing and what their focus has been. Ontario's focus has really been early childhood educators. They did a couple last year, tech and health. They do general draws, but they're not as common. We have some time for questions, so I'll open it up for questions because I know a lot of people might have a lot of questions. I'll leave my information here. So we have our WhatsApp number. You can message us. And again, you can always follow us on Instagram or send us an email. We do offer 2 types of consultations. We have an hour consultation where you get to meet either me or Hernan. And during that consultation, it's just important to really evaluate your profile, really look at if you have an Express Entry profile to see if you are accounting for all the points. So I was telling Daniela that we had a student who attended one of the Lambton's webinars, the one that we did last month. And when I checked her score, she was off 15 points. And I was like, I don't understand why you're off 15 points. Well, she had used the wrong DLI for Lambton because there's 2 campuses. And she used the wrong one, so the system wasn't granting her points for education in Canada. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but when points are like at over 500 and you are not accounting for 15 points, that makes a difference. I've had consultations where sometimes you'll have a friend or family member do an express entry profile for you, and then you just kind of cross your arms and wait. I think you really have to be proactive and do various examples and really revise it to see if you're getting points for every single thing, because there's a lot of people that, I mean, creating the profile is easy if you've done it and you understand the system, but if you don't look at things or accounting for things, then you're missing 10 points, 5 points, etc. So that's important. So yeah, we could do that during the hour consultation, or if you have very specific questions, then we have a 30-minute consultation. They have a value of $230 to $150. Just really depends on the type of consultation that you want. So I'll open it up for some questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, actually 15 points is quite a lot. And we need to double and triple check every single letter or number we type, because it can make a huge difference. So great that you could help her. Let's get started with the questions. Here we have, oh yeah, in the Ontario Nominee Program, in the Federal Skilled Working Program, can 1 year work experience be any tier 0, 1, 2, or 3?
So sorry, I'm muted. In the Ontario Nominee Program, in the Federal Skilled Work, but when they say the Federal Skilled Worker Program, they're talking about the job offer stream, I'm assuming. Can 1 year work experience be in any of the tiers? So as long as, remember, your job offer has to be in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. So that's your job offer. But on top of that, if you're applying under the job offer stream as a federal skilled worker, you also have to have a minimum of 2 years work experience within the last 5 years of submitting your application, right? So there's 2 things that you have to account for: having the right job offer, but also making sure that you have experience in the job offer that you're receiving, okay? I was a logistic assistant for 1.5 years as part-time, and now hired as a stockroom supervisor just last month. What pathway should I take? So these are very general questions, because I don't know your age, I don't know your level of education, I don't know your CLB score. Based on the information that we provided, stockroom supervisor, I'm going to assume, because it's a supervisor role, that it's at least a tier 3. And logistic assistance, that would be probably a tier 3 as well. So, and you have 1.5 years worth. We have to look at the full amount of hours, but let's say you're an international student, right? So if you're an international student of Lambton, and you graduated, you don't need work experience for the international student stream. You just need that job offer. So potentially, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria and you speak to your employer and your employer is willing to support you, then you could potentially apply under the international student stream. With that being said, remember what I mentioned. They do general draws and then they do NOC specific draws, right? So unfortunately, your work experience, or if you were to get a job offer in one of these occupations, it's not the NOCs that typically Ontario does draws for, right? So you would fall under the general draws. So what I recommend everybody to do right now is, it could happen where Ontario just surprises us with draws. If you're eligible, create an expression of interest. Just create an expression of interest for yourself, because if there's a draw, you want to make sure that you get invited, right? But before you do so, if you're applying through the non-express entry stream, then you need to make sure that you speak to your employer to see if they're on board. Okay, so here, does LMIA still add points in Ontario nominee program? So this is a good question, because it doesn't give you points. So when you look at all the point factors, LMIAs don't give you points. LMIAs used to give you points through express entry, which surprisingly enough, yesterday this was eradicated, so no longer, right? But under the Ontario Immigration Nominee Program, you look at the selecting factors, it never gave you points. You got points based on other things like your salary and the NOC that you were working in and things of that nature, your education, but not whether or not you had an LMA, but rather if you had a valid work permit or not. With that being said, the short answer is it never did. And now not for express entry either. Work experience as a consultant is valid for adding points in Canadian experience or in PNP. So again, your work, it depends when you gained your work experience. And I think this is very important. So sometimes we need to have context, right? So under the federal skilled work, under the federal skilled worker program for express entry, you can be physically in Canada and be working for a company that's remote. And that work experience will be accounted for under the federal skilled worker program. For Canadian experience class, only experience that you gain through your PGWP or an open work permit is going to count, and they're only going to count 30 hours a week, right? So if you're a consultant, again, I'm going to assume that it's tier 3. So as long as it's a skilled position, tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, then you would get points under Canadian experience class, right? And for a PNP, yes, we just have to see what category it's under. Should we be working for a particular time to be eligible for the program, or just a job offer is good? Depending on the stream, right? So if you're under the the foreign worker stream for the job offer, then you need those 2 years of work experience in order within the last 5 years. If you're applying as an international student stream under the job offer, then you don't need work experience. Now, for the express entry, remember, you need to be eligible as a federal skilled worker or as a Canadian experience class. So for both of these programs, you need work experience. If it's Canadian experience class, you need a minimum of 1 year work experience in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. As a federal skilled worker, you need a minimum of 1 year work experience in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, and it can be in Canada, outside of Canada, right? So it just really depends on the stream that you're applying under. For international student stream, is it 2 years from graduating ceremony date or for program completion date? The completion date. So it's like your PGWP, right? Because you complete your program, but you don't graduate until months after, right? So once you complete your program, that's basically the end date. That's when the ceremony is just when you're celebrating, essentially, your graduation. So we're going to base it on the completion date. That's what they're going to base it on. Can I apply in foreign worker stream or international student stream? I have been working as a software developer position, totally remote company, no office, for 9 months. And after that, I got laid off last month. Unfortunately not, because you're laid off, right? So one of the requirements is that you have a job offer, okay? So if you're no longer working, well, you don't have that job offer. So we need that job offer. So what you could potentially do is try to find a job offer, which you have, if you have experience as a software developer, this is a very in-demand position. So you may want to start job searching and then speak with the employer. Now, remember, under the international student stream, you don't need experience. So as long as you have that job offer, and the employer is able to support your application, you're fine. If I'm not mistaken, software developers are one of those tech positions that are usually selected, right? So it's hard for me to memorize the whole list. I mean, there's tons of like NOCs, but I'm going to say that they are. So then you have a really high possibility. And if you study something related to software development in Canada, then you're going to get max points for STEMs. You're going to get points for the industry that you're working in. So you have a good shot. You just need that job offer. Is it okay to put in our profile if we still do not have a permanent job at the moment? No. So I'm going to assume that you want to say that you have a job offer, but you don't, right? And so remember something. When you create an expression of interest, if you get invited based on the information that you provided, right? So the province is then going to request supporting documents of your job offer, the wage, everything. If something isn't adding up, so you've accounted for points that perhaps don't exist, like let's say you counted points because you have a wage of $40 an hour, but really you're only getting paid $35, then that nomination is not going to be granted, right? So you want to make sure that you're being you're being honest when you create the expression of interest. Hello, while I'm waiting for my PGWP, can I apply for permanent residency? As long as you meet the eligibility criteria, sure, yes. With that said about DLI, Christina from Mississauga, what DLI should be used? I don't remember. There's a list. You can actually go online and say find DLI. If you put Ontario and then you put Lambton, it'll show you too. So you just want to make sure that you're using the right one. I can't remember exactly the number that we used right now. But yeah, it was actually not giving her the full points, which was interesting. I didn't think that would make a difference, but it does. I can show you that information, Christina, if you want, and then you can share with the students. I have an email. So what about job-specific roles differ from initial offer letter and work duties completed letter? Sorry. What about job-specific roles? What if the job-specific roles differ from initial offer letter and work duties completed letter? You get after 1 year completed. Both lies different streams. One in STEM. I'm a little confused. Okay, so I'm thinking that you're asking me that your initial contract is different from the actual duties that you're doing. I'm going to assume, or if you want to maybe write this again, but both lies different streams. Okay, I get it. So the decision that Ontario makes is going to be based on the information that you provide, right? So if we're looking at the job offer stream, either international student stream or as a foreign worker stream, STEMS gives you really high advantage in terms of points, right? You're talking about skills trades, so I'm not sure if you qualify under the express entry stream, but there's less draws for that. So we really have to analyze your job duties, what you've been doing, what you've been focusing in to see if you're even utilizing the right knock. Because things change when you're working with an employer, right? And if you have an open work permit, I mean, they could promote you and demote you whenever. So I think at the moment when you're applying, what you want to do is make sure that the job offer that they're granting you is one that's actually going to give you the most points, and you're actually going to be doing those duties. And then when they give you a reference letter, which is probably what you're referring to, like, hey, this is a reference letter that demonstrates that I have the work experience, then we focus on utilizing the right knock. But again, as an international student stream, you don't need the work experience, so it would be irrelevant, right? So just it depends. But I think STEMS in Ontario is huge. Oh, I didn't put it up live, sorry. But I answered it. Will my co-op be counted as work experience if it's outside Ontario where I pursued my studies? If it's a co-op that you needed to complete your studies, no, won't be counted. For federal skilled workers, since job offer does not give any points anymore, is it still required to have a job offer to go to the stream? Is employment support letter still required? So one thing is express entry and another thing is the Ontario nominee program, right? So what ended up happening is in express entry, you were granted anywhere from 50 points to 200 points if you had a close work permit, right? So there were LMIs that used to support PRs, or if you had a close work permit through a free trade agreement and you worked with the employer for a certain amount of time, you could request 50 points to 200 points depending on the knock of the occupation. That's not going to be granted anymore as of yesterday. So it's going to reduce, in my assumption, it's going to reduce the CRS scores. Now, your question is employment support letter still required? This has always been a requirement for OIMP, right? So that's not going to change. So let's not confuse the employer form or support for getting more points because you have a close work permit. And there's two different things. Express entry is federal, and the OIMP is only for Ontario. And that employer form is just to make sure that the employer meets the employer eligibility criteria in terms of revenue and people working there. I'm an administrative coordinator full-time, working almost 1 year in a general company with CELPIP 8. Does that work for IMP or better go for express entry? I mean, you look at your express entry score, right? Like, I'm not sure what your CRS score is, or your age, or your studies and whatnot, but the last CEC draw, if I'm not mistaken, was like 520 or something, right? So that's for people that have 1 year of work experience in Canada, right? So we're looking at, for you to have a competitive score, you need to like score the highest in your CELPIP. You need to have at least 3 years of work experience, foreign work experience, at least 1 year here. French is becoming a big thing now, so people are getting additional points because of that, et cetera, et cetera. So we would have to look at your express entry score. My recommendation is never put your eggs in one basket. So if you're eligible for 2 OIMP and express entry, then do both. Do an expression of interest in both, and whatever comes out first, right? But your occupation, because it's an administrative role, unfortunately isn't something that's typically selected in Ontario specifically. So you would be under the general draws, and as I mentioned, there aren't a lot of these throughout the year. How do you create an expression of interest for express entry profile? Well, you just have to go online to the immigration website, and then select that you want to create an express entry profile. The system is pretty smart, that they'll ask you a couple of questions in terms of age and things of that nature, and then it'll tell you what it'll tell you if you're eligible for one of the 3 programs, and then it'll give you your score, and then you just have to wait to be invited. To create an express entry profile is free, anybody can do it. But then again, like I mentioned, fairly easy if you know what you're doing, but then if you don't do it properly, then you may be losing out on points that you could be claiming. Okay, I'm an administrative full-time. Oh, I think we already answered that. Can you apply for express entry and multiple streams at the same time? No. Is that express entry? I think so. Do you know? Sometimes these acronyms confuse me. Oh, can you apply for an expression of interest in multiple streams? It depends. So, remember for express entry, it would so you can have an expression of interest in multiple times, but if you get selected, so we've had cases where someone has had an express entry expression of interest and a job offer expression of interest, so they've had 2. But then if they get invited, then they would have to withdraw one and then go with the other one, right? So you could, it's just you can't submit 2 applications. You have to choose one. I work as a document administrative and started my full-time job in January. However, I worked full-time on the same position during my semester break and part-time while I was studying. Would I be eligible for a student stream program? Yes. So again, because you don't need work experience, it's fine. So you have a job offer right now because you started working with the company in January. So you have a legitimate job offer, and you're working as an administrative, it's an administrative role. So again, I'm going to assume it's tier 3 because administrative assistants are tier 3. So if the employer meets the requirements and they're willing to support your application in terms of actually sign that employer form, then you could create an expression of interest, right? But you would enter probably into the general draws. So then we would have to see when there is in draws, if you have a competitive score or not. I'm an international student working as a manager position full-time in food sector for the last 9 months. For which path am I eligible? So I think right now what your focus needs to be is probably completing school, right? But as I mentioned, there are some through the express entry streams that you could actually apply without having any Canadian work experience, or under the express entry as a federal skilled worker, you could also apply, right? So it just really depends on, you're asking me which pathway you're eligible. I need way more context than that. Be mindful of something. As you're studying, I would highly suggest that you also try to engage in studying French, simply because you could potentially receive an invitation even before you graduate. If you are able to get an intermediate level French 7 or higher and be selected through the Francophone streams and express entry. Can I apply in foreign worker stream or international student stream? I've been working as a software developer. I think we answered this one too. And they said no, because you don't have a job offer. You need to do several applications to apply all streams available for the PR. Provincial nomination, French proficiency, or just a big pool. You just do one application and fall according to your points and qualify. You need to do several applications to apply to all the streams available for PR, provincial nomination, or just a big pool. You just do one application. Okay, this is a good question. This is a good question, because I think people get confused with express entry. So express entry is like the federal program, or it's basically it selects people. So it's a system. It's actually not a program. So express entry is it's a system that selects people based on age and education and things of that nature. With that being said, under express entry, you have 3 programs: Federal Skilled Worker Program, Canadian Experience Class, and the Federal Skilled Trades, right? So people get confused because then they'll see all these draws: PNP draw, Canadian Experience Class, General one. So you need to be eligible for one of the 3, right? Most people are eligible as Federal Skilled Worker or Canadian Experience Class, which is why even if you're a student, you can still create a profile and be eligible as a Federal Skilled Worker, because you have education and experience back home, and you have your English or French proficiency, etc. So as long as you have 67 points or more, you technically enter into the pool, right? So let's say the system gives you a 410. You have never even worked here, you haven't finished graduating here, etc., but you have a 410 because of your experience back home, your education, and everything else. If you have a CLB 7 in French, well, now not only are you eligible as a Federal Skilled Worker program under the Federal Skilled Worker program, but because you have a CLB 7, you're also eligible when they do French draws. So when we see people getting selected under the French draws and the points are like 390 and 4 something and 420, well, that's what I'm telling people. If you're studying, also study French, because technically you don't need Canadian experience. We can utilize all of your experience in outside of Canada, etc., and you could technically get selected without even having worked here, right? So that's what I mean by, like, because people get, that's express entry. Now, in terms of the provincial nominee program, to answer your question, it depends. So if it's a job offer stream, you don't need express entry at all. You're just going to create an expression of interest. As long as you meet the eligibility criteria, you'll get invited, then apply for your PR. But if it's the express entry stream, you need to have an express entry profile and also create an expression of interest in Ontario's PNP. I hope that answered your question. I think I answered as much as I could. There's some more, so I'll probably just do Annie's, and then anybody that wants to get in touch with us, I would be more than glad to assist you. So it says here, what are the implications for the employer to support my application? Is it something complex, or is it just signing documents and complying with some of the company's conditions? This is a good question, because a lot of employers, this is the question, right? Like, what's the liability for them, etc. I think sometimes when employers have to disclose this information, they get a little cautious, because it's asking questions in terms of revenue and things of that nature. So essentially, at first, they just have to complete that employer form, right? But as I mentioned, the province can always request additional information. So they may want to see they may want to see information about their revenue statement, so any T2s, right? They may question, well, what happened here? Like you're supposed to have $1 million revenue, but maybe you had a loss here, like what happened this year, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it just opens them up to be questioned, and perhaps employers don't want to. But if everything falls in line and they meet all the eligibility criteria, then it's fine. So just to answer your question, at the beginning, it's just signing that employer form, but I think it then opens them up to be questioned, and some employers simply just don't want that. So it is a tough conversation. Not to say that it's impossible. We've had clients that have been supported by, have been supported by employers. So with that being said, I mean, the program is still there. People are still applying. People are still getting invited. So I mean, it happens. It's just a conversation that you need to have with your employer. I think that's it. Thank you so much for the invitation, Christina. Thank you so much for everything. I'll get you that DLI because I thought that was pretty interesting. So I'll get you that information so you can share with the students. And thank you for inviting us and keeping us in mind.
No, thank you so much, Sandra. Thanks for replying more than 24 questions, about 24 questions. That's quite a lot. I have sent already in the chat. You will find Velosa Immigration information, phone number. You can contact them if you want to book an appointment. Regarding the DLA, I think I already found it but you can send me and we can verify.
Okay.
Everything is online, so just go to the official website. That's the information I sent to you. There are like all different DLIs from all 4 campuses. You can get over there. I have sent that already. So again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Remember, if you are from our technology programs, any of the programs, chemical laboratory, advanced project management, artificial intelligence, and lots more than we have, we will be pleased to have you in our networking event. Contact us if you would like to participate as a speaker. It's a great opportunity to showcase yourself. And that's going to be it for today. Again, Sandra, thank you so much for taking the time to answer so many questions. And
thank you.
No, thank you. And to our graduates for taking the time for being here. I hope you're all doing great and have an amazing day. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.